She was 17, a child queen in silken pearls, dragged to a scaffold by men twice her age. They called her reckless. They called her wicked. But the truth they buried? She was terrified, and no one saved her. If you think Catherine Howard deserves to be remembered, hit subscribe now. Her story starts right here. The candlelights clung to the crumbling walls of Lambeth's palace, a decaying monument to ambition long outpacing fortune. The hearths were cold, the sheets threadbare, and the air reeked of damp stone and neglect. Here, in this half-forgotten corner of Tudor England, the ghosts of discarded noble daughters drifted like mist. Among them was Catherine Howard. She was no princess, no titled heiress, just another girl in a house full of girls, orphans, distant cousins, and unwanted wards shipped off to noble relatives who barely remembered their names. Catherine was 12 when she arrived at Lambeth, her mother long dead, her father a political embarrassment, clinging to the tattered remains of the once mighty Howard name. Her uncle was Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, one of the most ruthless men in England, a power broker who believed in bloodlines, not family, and it showed. Because if you think Tudor noble houses were safe havens for orphaned girls, you haven't been paying attention. This wasn't a finishing school. This was a hunting ground. The halls of Lambeth were lined with predatory eyes. Men in their 30s and 40s, drinking too much claret, laughing too loudly, watching teenage girls play music and dance. Girls who had nowhere to run. Catherine Howard grew up in that darkness, a place where beauty was currency and obedience was survival, where older men whispered promises in candlelit rooms, and no one came when you cried, while other girls Catherine's age worried about needlework or which boy. She learned to read a man's face for danger. She learned how to bow her head, how to smile without meaning it, how to swallow fear like bitter wine. By 15, she was already marked, not by scandal, by inevitability. A Howard girl was never meant for an ordinary life. They were meant for marriage alliances, for beds and birthing chambers, for being traded like painted chess pieces in the ceaseless game of Tudor power. And if you think anyone cared about the heart or soul of a girl like Catherine, you're dreaming. Because history remembers kings and crowns. It forgets the girls who bled for them. But here's the thing. We don't have to forget her. Not this time. If you believe that girls like Catherine Howard, teenagers who never had a choice, never had a protector, and were thrown into the jaws of power without so much as a prayer, deserve to be remembered, then subscribe right now. Like this video if you think Catherine deserved more than what the world gave her. Share this story if you believe history should name its victims, not just its kings. Because this is just the beginning. And what comes next makes this forgotten childhood look almost merciful. The Tudor court was a glittering carcass, a world where silk and satin covered bloodstains you could still smell if you stood too long near the walls. By the time Catherine Howard turned 15, she wasn't stepping into a court of chivalry and romance. She was stepping into a slaughterhouse with better table manners. This was Henry VIII's England, a king famous not for wisdom or mercy, but for the corpses he left behind. 3 wives had already come and gone. Catherine of Aragon, married for 20 years, discarded when her womb failed to give him sons. Anne Boleyn, Catherine's own cousin, executed for imagined sins whispered by enemies desperate to save themselves. Jane Seymour, who gave Henry a son but paid for it with her life, dying of infection in her blood-soaked bed. And then the 4th wife, Anne of Cleves, a German princess whose only crime was existing in the wrong face. Henry called her a Flanders mare after seeing her in person. Annulled in 6 months, exiled to a country estate, and lucky, if only because her head stayed attached to her body. That was the court Catherine entered, a place where survival meant understanding one thing. The king wasn't a man. He was a storm, a living tempest in velvet and fur. One moment charming, the next foaming with rage. His enormous body rotting from within, his leg ulcer leaking pus beneath layers of cloth of gold. No one told Catherine this outright, but she saw it in the way courtiers bowed too deeply, in the nervous eyes of noblewomen at court feasts, in the way servants disappeared overnight after a careless word. And here's the part you won't find in sanitized history books. The court didn't care if you were ready. The moment you were deemed beautiful enough, or valuable enough, or expendable enough, you were thrown into the arena. Catherine Howard was 15. Henry VIII was 49. Obese, diseased, increasingly paranoid. But he wanted a rose without a thorn, a fresh, untouched beauty to make him feel like a young man again. And the Howards, Catherine's own blood, handed her over, not as a daughter, not as a niece, as an offering. Because in this court, ambition weighed more than family. And if you think anyone hesitated to throw a teenage girl into the lion's den for power, you haven't been paying attention. This wasn't love. This wasn't courtly romance. This was political blood sport, dressed up in pearls and poetry. And Catherine, poor Catherine, was about to become the prettiest pawn in England's deadliest game. The wedding dress shimmered in the candlelight, hundreds of pearls stitched into silk so heavy it dragged against the floor like an anchor. It was made for a queen, but its wearer was a girl, Catherine Howard, barely 17. Her cheeks were flushed with the heat of the summer court, the weight of expectation, and the suffocating scent of too many roses crammed into too small a chapel. At the altar stood Henry VIII, a man twice her age, his face bloated, his leg wound hidden beneath embroidered hose. His doublet glittered with gemstones worth more than her entire family estate, but no amount of velvet could mask the ruin underneath. His eyes were watery. His jowls sagged like melting wax. And yet Every noble in England cheered because a beautiful queen meant peace at court, meant the king might smile again, might forget the blood he'd spilled to get there. The ceremony was a grotesque theater. The archbishop's voice booming in Latin, no one truly heard. Catherine's voice, so soft it barely reached the front row, forced into the required vows. "I will," she whispered. They placed the crown upon her head. It was too large, a relic designed for women twice her size and twice her experience. It slipped crookedly, and a lady-in-waiting hurried to straighten it while the court laughed. The feast that followed was obscene. Swan roasted in its own feathers, pies so large children could have hidden inside, acrobats dangling from iron chandeliers, musicians who played until their fingers bled. Catherine sat at the high table, a fragile figure in a mountain of gold and gilt. She picked at the food, the jewels on her bodice digging into her skin, smiling when required, laughing when expected. They called her the rose without a thorn, a perfect, unspoiled blossom, but no one cared whether the stem was broken beneath the pea. And then came the wedding night. The royal bedchamber was a shrine to excess. Crimson tapestries embroidered with hunting scenes, a four-poster bed carved with Tudor roses, and the royal coat of arms. The bedding ceremony was mercifully brief, but the meaning was clear. In the flicker of torchlight, Catherine climbed into the vast perfumed bed, lying still as the heavy curtains closed. What passed between them that night isn't recorded. But what we do know is this: Catherine Howard awoke a queen, but she was no freer than the night before. Because in Tudor England, a royal bride was not a wife. She was a possession. And as the weeks turned into months, the court began its favorite sport: waiting for the new queen to fall. In every royal court, there are two sets of rules: the ones carved in law and scripture, and the ones whispered in bedchambers, behind heavy drapes, in the space between wine cups and curt nods. Catherine Howard was fluent in both. You had to be, because while the palace walls echoed with music and the sermons of priests, they also hummed with secrets, and no secret stayed buried for long. Catherine had them, whispers of her past, of nights spent at Lambeth Palace when she was just a girl, barely more than a child, when men twice her age crept into her chamber. There was Francis Derham, a young courtier, charming, ambitious, dangerous. He'd called her my wife in jest. Others said it wasn't a jest at all. And worse still, there had been others. Rumors that traveled like wildfire through the servants' quarters, growing darker with every retelling. And in a court like Henry VIII's, rumor could be a death sentence. The women closest to Catherine knew. Her ladies in waiting, girls who laughed with her by day and trembled for her by night. They shared the same terror, the same understanding that in this palace, one misstep, one stray word could lead you to the block. And then there was Thomas Culpeper, a favored courtier, handsome, reckless, beloved by the king, who could afford to leer at the queen and get away with it. They said he was in her chamber late at night, that letters passed between them, scrawled in shaky, desperate hands. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Catherine Howard was 17, a girl raised in a world where love was traded for favors, where you didn't say no to powerful men, where you were taught that your body wasn't your own. It belonged to the family name, to the court, to the crown. Was it recklessness, naivety, a last gasp at something resembling affection in a life so tightly caged? Or was it survival, the only kind she'd ever known? Whatever it was, the walls were closing in. The court chroniclers were sharpening their quills. The king's counselors, resentful of the queen's youth and influence, began to murmur. And so, in the dead of night, as London's streets lay silent and frost rimmed the windows of Whitehall Palace, a maid slipped through the queen's antechamber with a letter in hand, a letter meant for Culpeper, a letter that would damn them both. But no one spoke of it. Not yet. In Tudor England, secrets were currency, and Catherine's debt was growing. If you believe, as I do, that Catherine wasn't a schemer, but a girl fighting to survive a monstrous system designed to devour her, then let her name be spoken. Subscribe now, so her story isn't forgotten again. Like this video if you believe no girl should ever be traded for pow. And share this if you agree that it's time to tell the truth about the women history tried to erase. Because Catherine's end is coming, and it's far worse than you think. It started with a whisper. It always did. A low conversation in a tapestry-hung chamber. A muttered word between courtiers with too much ambition and too little conscience. And from there, the crack widened. A letter found, a servant questioned, a name spoken too loudly. By autumn of 1541, the Queen's secrets were no longer hers alone. It was Archbishop Cranmer, the King's own trusted advisor, who first delivered the blow. On All Saints' Day, while the King knelt in solemn prayer, the Archbishop slipped a folded letter into Henry's hands. History records it as a cautious document filled with deferential language, but what it contained was treason, not against the crown, against the girl who wore it. It spoke of lightness in behavior, of familiarities before marriage, of impropriates with gentlemen at court, and though it stopped short of naming Culpeper outright, the implication was clear. The Queen had a past, and perhaps a present. Henry VIII, the man who'd murdered wives for less, read the words with growing disbelief, and then with rage. Accounts tell of a king so furious he staggered, clutching the arms of his chair, his face purple, his leg wound breaking open, the stink of infection filling the chamber. He ordered an immediate investigation. Not in days, not in hours, now. Francis Derham was dragged from his rooms, beaten, interrogated, threatened with the rack. He confessed. He told them of his marriage contract with Catherine, of secret meetings, of stolen nights. And though whether the stories were truth or survival-driven lies, no one could say. It didn't matter. The court wanted blood. Thomas Culpeper was next. They caught him in the dead of night, sweat-soaked, trembling, knowing already what awaited men accused of touching the king's property. He denied it. Then he wept. Then he begged. But in Tudor England, innocence was irrelevant once your name was spoken, and Catherine, poor doomed Catherine, was kept in ignorance, locked in her rooms at Hampton Court Palace, told only that she was unwell, that the king was concerned for her health. She waited and waited, and no one came. At night, the guards outside her chamber door changed without speaking. Her ladies wept in silence. Food went untouched, and the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant bells of London tolling the hour. She must have known. She must have felt it in her marrow. The Tudor court had turned its back, and soon its executioners would come. They came for her at dawn, not with fanfare, not with ceremony, but like thieves. 4 guards in plain doublets, faces grim, weapons at their sides. No trumpets, no announcements. No one called her Your Grace. Catherine Howard, Queen of England, was told she was to leave Hampton Court Palace at once. She was not told why. Grey Thames, to a fortress that made the blood of every Tudor noble run cold. The Tower of London. It was a place for traitors, for condemned queens, for women like Anne Boleyn, who'd once held the same title, the same crown, and lost her head on the same stones. The journey by barge was short, but endless. Catherine sat shivering in the bow, cloaked against the November wind, her hair loose, her hands clenched in her lap. No ladies accompanied her. No one spoke. The tower rose before her like a mausoleum, black against the breaking dawn, its spires daggering the sky. And when they reached the steps, she hesitated, because every Tudor knew what it meant to climb those stairs. Inside, the queen was shown not to a gilded chamber, but to a small, bare room. A rough bed, a narrow window barred with iron. They called it the Queen's Lodgings, but it was a cell, and here she waited as they tore apart her past, as they interrogated every servant, every maid, every tutor, every companion she'd ever known. Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper faced the worst of it. Stripped, tortured, forced to confess. Their words written in trembling script, ink blurred with blood. The council debated Catherine's fate in darkened rooms. Some called for immediate execution. Some demanded annulment. All agreed the scandal had to be buried with her. And Henry, the man who had once called her his rose without a thorn, he did not visit. He did not send word. He did not weep. He stayed at Whitehall, nursing his fury and his wounded pride. He told courtiers that Catherine was a strumpet, a serpent in his bed, a traitress fit for the axe. The girl who had danced in summer sunlight was now a prisoner waiting for her death warrant. And the only sounds were the sea winds in the Thames and the bells tolling ever closer. February 12th, 1542. The cold had teeth that morning, A mist rolled off the Thames, so thick it swallowed the towers, the scaffold, the black-draped block. But inside the Tower of London, Catherine Howard wasn't looking out the window. She was on her knees. Witnesses, silent, faceless in the records, said she prayed through the night, murmuring the same name over and over, Thomas. Whether she meant Culpeper or God, no one dared ask. At dawn, the constable entered her cell. He told her the time had come. And though she trembled, though her face was pale and her hands ice, she stood. She asked for one thing, not mercy, not forgiveness. She asked to see the block. It was tradition for the condemned to inspect the executioner's work, to steady themselves for what was coming. The guards led her to the scaffold. The square was nearly empty. Only the official witnesses, a handful of guards, and the executioner in his crimson hood. They say she touched the block, ran her fingers along the grain of the wood, and whispered something no one could hear. Then, in a voice as steady as any queen before her, she spoke. "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Thomas Culpeper." A single line, the rawest act of defiance ever uttered on those stones. And with that, she knelt. The executioner raised his axe, and the girl they called the Rose Without a Thorn fell silent forever. The courtiers turned away. The city's bells tolled once, and history did what it always does, tried to forget. But we don't have to. If you believe Catherine Howard deserves more than to be remembered as a footnote to a king's ego, if you believe no girl should die for the crime of being young, loved, and afraid, subscribe now, like this video, share her name, because stories like hers vanish when we stop speaking them aloud, and history has buried too many already. Catherine was 17. 17. And no one saved her. They say her ghost still walks there. On cold February nights, when the mist rolls thick off the river and the bells toll midnight, some claim to hear her. Footsteps racing down the long stone gallery of the Tower of London. It's called the Haunted Gallery now, but once it was just a passageway between the Queen's lodgings and the chapel, the last path she ever took while alive. The legend says that on the eve of her death, Catherine Howard broke free from her guards, barefoot, hair unbound, her pale shift trailing behind her, and she ran, sobbing through the corridors, screaming for the king. "Henry, mercy, mercy!" She fell at the door of the chapel, pounding on the wood, begging for her life. But no one opened it. Not God, not king, not fate. In the end, it's not the axe that haunts us. It's that final, futile scream. A 17-year-old girl, a pawn, a child thrown to lions in silks and jewels, left to bleed beneath the weight of a crown she never asked for. And like so many women in history, once the crown fell, her name became a cautionary tale, a warning, a half-remembered ghost story whispered on dark nights. But here's the truth. Catherine Howard was not meckless. She was not wicked. She was not a fool. She was a teenager in an impossible world, punished for surviving it the only way she knew how. And she deserves better than silence, better than being the girl after Anne Boleyn, better than a name scrawled on a tourist plaque. So before we go, if this story haunted you, if you believe Catherine deserves to be remembered not as a careless queen, but as a lost, terrified girl who tried to find love where she could, subscribe, like this video, and share it. Because the past doesn't stay buried on its own. We bury it, we look away, we romanticize it. But names like Catherine Howard are the ones that should echo down centuries. Not for their crowns, but for what the world did to them. And tonight, somewhere in that old tower, a ghost runs down the gallery still. Her name was Catherine, and she was 17.